So again, join us on Shabbat Shuvah. I'll be delving into some of these areas as well, and I think a really interesting way. So we talked about the Yerushalmi last time, told us that it was customary on source 24 that there were in both Yehuda and in the Galil, they held like the different opinions we saw, both like Rabbi Akiva, and it was as well as the second opinion of Yochanan Nuri in the Mishnah that we had seen previously. And so we had said that the Rav in box number 25 in the notes in his Mesoras Harav Rosh Hashanah Machzor talks about how that we actually are able to fill both of these ideals about where it is that we put in Malchios. Well, again, whether Malchios comes in Kedushas Hashem, the bracha known as Hakel HaKadosh or Melech HaKadosh, or whether it comes in as part of Kedushat Hayom, which is the bracha that we make normally like on a Shabbos or a holiday, Mekadesh HaShabbat or Mekadesh Yisrael V'Azmanim. And the Rav says that this is the idea that we have of this special insertion. The bracha of HaMelech HaKadosh is extended. It's not a short bracha. Remember, it's all these uvachains. All those uvachains paint a kind of a dismal picture of how God could create kingship in this world. God could coerce us to coronate him as king. That's one possibility. Or the second is a little more uplifting, is Aleinu l'shabeach, which is God gives us the choice. He doesn't make us have to coronate him, and we do it on our own. And so there's really two paths for us. And it's an interesting dichotomy for us to think about as we're standing in front of our Creator on Rosh Hashanah. What path do we want to choose for ourselves? God is demanding that we're going to coronate him. Do we want to choose the more difficult path where it's harder to coronate him because God's going to force our hand? Or do we choose the path where we actively try to coronate him as king? Now, if you actually open up your Machzor for a moment, you'll notice in the Musaf Amidah, which you can find on page 525. I think that's the right one. Yeah, 525. Flip through for just a moment on your own these different psukim that we're reading here on 525. What like, do these psukim look familiar to you? Are these psukim that we say from time to time?
We see them all the time when we land.
That's Musaf. Sorry, 525, 527. Yeah. Aleinu, sorry, move to the bottom of the page. Aleinu, I'm sorry. On the very bottom is where it starts. Aleinu, and then turn to the next page, the bottom of that page, right? These are psukim that we're really familiar with. Like, for example, if you look on page 529, it'll be easier, right? So, Kila Hashem Amulcha Moshel Bagoyim, Hashem Malach Gut Lavesh, Lavesh Hashem Ozi Dazarav Tikon Tevel Baltimot, Su Sharim Rashechem. These are psukim that we're like a little bit familiar with. Maybe like the most familiar would be if you look towards the last pasuk that we're going to quote on as part of Malchios. If you look on page 531, what's the last pasuk that is included? Again, we said there were 10 psukim. We'll talk about that. Shema Yisrael. So that's like the last pasuk that we're actually going to say in Malchios. So time out a second. What is different about the Hamlacha, the coronation that we are doing in this moment of Rosh Hashanah versus the moments throughout the entire year? We say Shema multiple times a day. How is me saying Shema Yisrael any different on tonight before I go to sleep or tomorrow morning at Shachris when I'm also saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, God is one? I'm essentially also coronating God as king. How is that coronation any different than what we're trying to do on Rosh Hashanah? In what way is it different?
Who says it's different?
Okay. So
I don't say it facetiously.
So let me say it like this. Why then do we make a big deal on Rosh Hashanah about coronating God as king if all these are psukim that are part of our everyday davening? So, okay, we said that Adam HaRishon was the first person, and maybe Avram was the first person to call God Adon. But why are we doing this different? Or what is it about Rosh Hashanah that is significantly different? So
the whole structure that we take 3 from Torah, 3 from Nevi'im, 3 from Tuvim.
Yeah, but it's also very concentrated.
Again, but why do I need to have an entire section devoted to Malchios if all the psukim that we're going to quote are the psukim that I say every single day?
Yeah, but you don't say it together
Oh, okay, so maybe that's something. Maybe there's something about like when they're all together. That's possible. So Rav Hutner in his Pachad Yitzchak has a beautiful idea. He says that every single day when we say Shema, I'm using Shema as an example, but any of these psukim would work just as well. We're really simply reflecting on like the state of affairs, right? Like we're saying God is the king. We're simply reflecting. So when I say Sushar and Mashechem, when I say Hashem Malach Lavesh, anytime I quote these psukim, which are familiar to us, it is simply a statement of the affairs of the world, right? God already existed before there were creatures in the world. This is just a statement of fact. But on Rosh Hashanah, we're not declaring God as king. That's not what we're doing. That would be a statement of fact. We're doing something a little bit different. We're renewing the coronation of the king. This is like very timely because this is happening like in England right now. We're going to see like a number of those. If you watched any of those things, you'll see some of it actually fits in perfectly. It's like a gift for every rabbi this year that, I mean, again, not that God forbid somebody passed away, but like what's happening, and there's so much to learn from.
I was going to say Lahavdil.
Lahavdil, correct. But it is, there's a coronation of the king, which is different. We have to like renew that coronation every single year. And the reason we have to do this, and we say this throughout the Musaf Amidah, in the Chazar is Hayom Harat Olam. Today is the birthday of the world. This is not a statement of fact. I mean, it is a statement of fact that the birthday of the world is today, but it's actually more than that. It is saying that in the same way that we believe that we can recreate ourselves through the power of tshuva, that we can magically change ourselves and we can start again from zero and we can be like new creations with a clean slate if we do tshuva, well, then we also have to have a brand new world. God literally is recreating the world every single year for us. And because of that, it requires a special coronation where we are renewing that every year. And that's what Malchios is all about. These psukim are purposely psukim that we're used to, which are statements of fact. But when we pull them together on Rosh Hashanah, the Malchios is not just saying, oh, God, you're our king. We do that every single day of the year. It is renewing that coronation of the king. So that's Malchios. Let's shift gears. We've done a lot of talking about Malchios. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Zichronos.
I'm almost surprised you don't touch on a renewal of the covenant then.
I mean, that kind of, I mean, think about, if you think, for instance, about some of the readings that we have, you have the Akedah, you've got, during the Akedah, God promises Avram that...
But they would be connected, obviously. Coronation and covenant are two sides of the same.
We're going to talk about the covenant in Shofros in just a minute. But yeah, you're spot on. So let's look through Zichronos again, page 531. 533. My apologies. Top of 533. So, what are we? If you were to say, what is the theme here of Zichronos?
Well, it's not enough that God has created the world, but we want to remember each and every one of us for the coming year in that world.
Okay. So let me ask you like the $64 million question. This has bothered me forever. If God remembers everything, we say it. Ata zocher masei olam. Upoked kol yitzurei kadem lefanecha nigu kol tam lumot ve'amon yisrael shemibreshi ki en shicha lifnei kisei chvodecha v'nistar minagenecha. You remember the making of the world. You come to all those formed long ago under your gaze, all hidden things come to light. You know everything. If that's a fact, and that's how we start Zichronos, and we say, God, you remember everything, so then why are we then going to tell him, if you continue on, like, please remember, Vayiskrel Elokim et Noach, Vayishma Elokim et Nakatam, right, and the Jewish people got hurt, Vayizacharti et Briti Yaakov. Why is it that we're now suddenly asking God to remember all these things? If God remembers everything, so we don't have to tell God to remember anything.
No, but we think these are important moments for him to remember us in. It's not he needs recollection. There's a lot of downtime in the history of the world.
It's a little bit like what you said about Malchus. God is the king all year, but the Rosh Hashanah come together to reassert it, to coronate. Here again, God remembers everything, but we want to emphasize he should remember the specific things which are important
which are useful and necessary.
We are in front of him in Yom Adin. As a judge,
I agree, but it's almost implying like you're going to somebody who knows everything, and you say, "I want to remind you of a few things." God's like, "Yeah, I know.
No, but
I know everything."
Remember this because this
Okay, good. So let's look at what Rav Nebenzahl says. Box 26. I think we're onto something. When referring to remembrance, zichronos, as applied to God, we must realize that we are merely borrowing a term from our own experience to aid our understanding. Thus, when we mention reminding God of the covenant that he made with our forefathers, we realize that God always remembers it. Instead, we are referring to God's presently activating this idea that is in his constant memory and putting it into action by applying the efforts of our ancestors meritoriously acts in today's world. In our prayers, we say, for it is you who eternally remembers all forgotten things. And there's no forgetfulness before your throne of glory. And from this, we understand that God always remembers everything. But then we immediately add, may you mercifully remember today the Akedah of Yitzchak for the sake of his offspring. This means that while God perpetually remembers everything, nevertheless on Rosh Hashanah, God, he decides to act on the basis of this memory so that the Akedah will be a mitigating factor enabling a favorable judgment of his children. It's not that we want God to remember it. He remembers everything. We want God to action on that. Right, that's a big difference. So again, when we're saying these psukim, this is what we're supposed to be thinking about. Not just, God, you remember everything and you're so wonderful. No, God, we want you to take action on those memories. And in fact, there's a beautiful idea. Rav Baruch Dov Povarsky, Rosh Panovich, in box 27, this is like, he takes this idea, I think, really a little bit more nuanced, and he really takes it to the next level here. So he says, Shnamar Psuke Zichonos Kadesh Yala, etc. Kilomar, as if to say, Shamirat Psuke Zichonot Segula Hima, Shiale Zichonin Lefanav Letova. Sharei Vadai in Sarich Lover, Eitzakash Baruchu, Zechiratov, in Shicha Lefanav. He asks our question, God knows all this stuff already. What are we reminding him? Ela ha'inyan hu she'al yedei amirat psukei hazichronot ve'ashar shtam balev, by saying these psukim of zichronos and feeling them in our heart, zochim she'akadosh baruch hu noheg itanu b'midat hazichira tova. This is how we get God to work with us. Kachu gam ha'inyan b'amirat psukei hamalcha kedei shamtam nechuni alechem ve'hayinu shamartem hi mevo v'derech lachem inyan hamalcha. So he's saying what? It's not just about God remembering our deeds, but it's also about us internalizing those ideas as well. And through those internalization, that's when God chooses to approach us favorably. In other words, this is similar to Rav Nebenzahl's view of like activating the merit, but it's actually a step beyond that. What does it require? It requires internalizing it too. We have to, if we want God to act, we have to internalize the lessons that are learned. So this is similar to what we say about Malchios. And so what does it mean, though, practically to have those ideas take root in our hearts? So take a look in box 28, which is Rav Dessler, Michtav Me'Eliyahu, and we'll just read it in English for the sake of time now. There are those who remember something, and there are others who remember everything. And there's still others who remember things so well that's as if it was happening right now. The memory of God, blessed be he, is certainly in the realm of actually happening, because the past and future are not relevant to God. Rather, everything is always in the present. And this principle is reflected in our prayers. See before yourself in the Akedah only if the Akedah reminds us and becomes actualized in our hearts. Only if we look towards Avram, our father, and learn to include ourselves in the Akedah through our sincere perseverance, according to our qualities based on his Torah and his blessed service, only then is it possible that we can merit to be joined together with the merit of the Akedah as seen before God, as one continuous chain through all the generations. It's not just that we have to internalize it, we have to act on it. You can't ask God to just remember some stuff. He remembers everything. We want God to action. It's not that we want him just to action. He's not going to action unless we internalize it. And what does it mean to internalize? It means to literally emulate those characteristics. We need to be like Avraham Avinu, who had such faith that he was willing to go to the end of the earth, literally, to give up everything, to sacrifice anything and everything for Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's what we have to do. When we're saying Zichronos, how can we ask the man, the being, God, who knows everything, to do well by us if we're not willing to hold up our part of the bargain itself? And perhaps that's a notion of Zichronos for us to take away over here. And when we read these psukim, I would encourage us to reflect on this idea of dedication to Hashem and his Torah. And in particular, in these moments of Zichronos, of Malchios, is about us coordinating God. So this is actions that we are now taking on ourselves. Zichronos is not about us reminding God. It's about our actions to live our lives in the best possible way. So I think that's something on Zichronos for us to kind of unpack. Okay, let's go onwards. Let's talk for a moment here about Shofros for a second. Let's turn to Shofros, which is the bottom of 539. Let's just get ourselves familiar with Shofros. I always find every year, I don't know if other people feel this stress, but like I start to lose steam around Shofros, right? Like it's a long Shemona Esrei. I'm geared up. I got the first 3 brachos in the bag. Malchios doing good, Zichronos less good than Shofros. I look at my watch. I realize that time is getting late. Everyone's waiting on me. Then I start like hustling a little bit. Let's spend a minute just looking at Shofros. What's in Shofros and what is its relationship to other things? So already we talked about this a little bit on 539. What are like the main shofar themes or moments of shofar blowing that we are referencing here in Shofros? Good. Excellent. Matan Torah, exactly. That's accompanied by the blowing of the shofar. What else?
It could be Brias Olam, but I'm not sure you can prove that.
Well, there's nothing here about Brias Olam, but what else if you were to flip through like that?
Basically, if you look at one of the last shofim, it's again almost going back to Malchios. That's when you're coronating or Levitua. So there's a connection between, I think, Shofros and Malchios.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just 1 second. Before we get to that, what's the other shofar blowing moment? So, Vaya Bayamu Taka b'shofar gadol, Yeshaya says. What are we talking about? Right. So this is like there's 2 shofars we're talking about. One is like a Matan Torah moment. The second is this like ultimate redemption moment, right? And so we're asking God to blow the shofar for the Messianic era. Notice though, what is the bracha? If you look at the bracha itself carefully, which starts in the middle of page 543.
Yeah.
What are we asking for? Tikab shofar gadol cheretinu, right? Kari b'zurim ben hagoyim, right? And so what emerges, the sound of the shofar really is taking on a dual role here. One is for us to find favor in Hashem so that there should be a good judgment. And the second is it represents the ultimate redemption that we're also hoping for, right? Kari b'zurim ben hagoyim, right? So there's these 2 pieces to it. Let's go back in our sources though and find the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. So many sources, hard to remember where it was. On source number 9 for just a moment. Let's remind ourselves. We saw this a couple weeks ago. It's very interesting Gemara. I'm going to start, it's a second paragraph in box 9. And I'm going to start in the middle over here where it says, V'amru lefanai b'Rosh Hashanah. Last 3 lines on the first line in the second paragraph. V'amru lefanai b'Rosh Hashanah malchios zichronos and shofros. God says we should say these 3 things. And we had previously said that these were like the equivalent of bringing the Shtei Halechem on Shavuos, the equivalent of bringing the Omer on Pesach. These are serious things. This is like almost like a sacrificial offering that we're making. So how do we do it? Malchios, Kadesh Tamlichun Aleichem, Malchios, that we just said, is so that we should coronate God as King. Zichronos, Kadesh Yala Zichronechem Lefanai L'Tova, Zichronos, is so that we should be remembered by God for good. And we just got through saying, what does it mean that God should remember us for good? In other words, that we should internalize our own actions so that God remembers us for good. And this is the important part. Uvema b'shofar. How do you do it? What is it? We're gonna have to ask that question. How do you do it? You do it through the shofar. According to this Gemara, what is the purpose of the shofar? Is the shofar connected to both Malchios and Zichronos? Is it the mechanism by which we can achieve Malchios and Zichronos? Or is the shofar only connected to Zichronos?
No, I think both.
Well, we blow through all the service. So
yes, we blow.
Indicates there's a connection.
I think Malchios, like I said before, it's definitely also Malchios included in shofar.
So the Ritva reads this Gemara that way. The Ritva reads it that way. Not everyone reads it that way because you can see like it's a little unclear. Uvema b'shofar it could be tied to Zichronos, right? So he says both. And this is where I want to use an example of like what's happening in Great Britain right now in the UK, which is there were literal horns being played for King Charles. Like literally, like they're playing horns. Like we talk about like the shofar coronating the king. How does the shofar coronate the king? What do you mean? Like we know exactly what that is like. There are horns that are played to create a certain like aura, thank you, right, around the king itself. And this is why, by the way, just like you were saying, we actually blow the shofar in the silent Amidah, in the repetition of the Amidah. In some communities, in the silent Amidah, we also blow it as well. When I was in Memphis, that was the custom. We blew it during the silent Amidah. And for the first year, it was like threw me off because I wasn't used to it. But I actually found it to be quite meaningful as time progressed, because the shofar is this tool. And what better way, like, while I'm thinking about Zichronos, when I'm thinking about Malchios, I want to hear the shofar. It should awaken something within me. As the Rambam says, Uri Shanu, it's got to awaken those who are asleep, and we're asleep in these ways, and so that's what the shofar's purpose is. Just as a side point, so like part of my job is to like call out the tekios and so on, and so it's pretty hard to do during the Silent Amidah because you can't really talk. So I developed a very elaborate color-coded system with like each of the words printed on big, and so I would like point to it. I like Tkia, Sharim Tura. It was like a whole system I had with about Tkia, and it was it's very elaborate. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that's partially where this custom comes from, because it's the Gemara says that it's bis shofar. That's how we do it. So what though is it about the shofar that's so integral to Rosh Hashanah? Yes, I get it. The Torah tells us to do it. I'm not like that's not the question. I understand the Torah tells us to do it. What is it about the shofar itself that's so integral to Rosh Hashanah?
Well, let me back you up somewhere else. Did they ever use the shofar at the Bet HaMikdash?
Sure.
Except on Rosh Hashanah.
Sure. It's used in all types of ways.
It's used on a weekday. It's used on Shabbos.
It's used when they go to war. We blow the shofar during different rituals.
During the davening.
Well, there was no davening, just service.
However.
Yes. The answer is it's not reserved only for there's. Well, I should say this: there are chatzot tzrot, so like.
That's different.
I don't want to get too far afield. You're asking a good question, but I'll hold it for now. Maybe we can for next year. We'll come back to like.
No, I just think
shofar
it illuminates some of this.
I think so. I think you're onto something. So let's look at Rav Nebenzahl one more time. Box 29. What is this deep connection? I think this is like amazing. Where's the first moment that we hear about the shofar? The very first moment by Abraham.
Oh,
right. The first moment he sees a.
No, but the word shofar doesn't.
Correct, but there is a connection between an ayal that is ne'achaz b'svach, literally his horns. And there is a connection that Chazal make between those horns and Rosh Hashanah. Look at what Rav Nebenzahl does with all this, box 29. To the complete dedication of our forefathers, Avram and Yitzchak, to God on Mount Moriah, Israel merited to receive the Torah at Sinai. It was the spiritual power which led the Jewish people to declare the seemingly incomprehensible words of we will do, and only afterwards we will understand, Naaseh v'nishma. This power stemmed from the fact that Avram and Yitzchak carried out the feat of heeding and only subsequently understanding the seemingly unfathomable commandment of the Akedah. There on Mount Moriah, the strength and unique ability to say we will do and we will understand was implemented in the hearts of the Jewish people. What it's an amazing idea here. It's amazing. I mean, Rav Nebenzahl, right? So what Rav Nebenzahl is saying is like, what is the connection between all these ideas? So we're talking about the shofar is the shofar that we're trying to blow here, is the shofar of Matan Torah. And we also know the shofar and Rosh Hashanah has this connection to the story of Avram and the Akedah, which we read on Rosh Hashanah. And what Rav Nebenzahl is saying is that in the same way that Avram didn't ask any questions, Naaseh v'nishma, he said, I want you to go do something. Avram says, sure, I'm going to do it. That power of essentially blind faith in that moment, in that place, is what gives the Jewish people, fast forward to the future, at Har Sinai, the ability to say Naaseh v'nishma. The ability just to say, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. God, it's It's one thing to say, I'll do whatever you want to a friend or whatever, but to God, when God could ask for anything, it's a pretty big thing, and we shouldn't take it so lightly. So Naasev and Ishma comes, it's rooted, Rav Nevin Sal says, from Abraham and Yitzchak in this moment. Now let's take this a step further. Look at the Talmud Yerushalmi and Tanit. So Amar Rav Yudah, this is the next box 30. Amar Rav Yudah Bar Simon, Amar Le'akash Baruch L'Avram, Achakol Hadorot, Atidin, Banachal Le'achos Ba'avonot, U'istabech B'tzarot, V'sofan Li'gael B'karnav Shal Ayel Hazeh. Rav Yehuda Bar Simon said that Hashem told Avram, in the future your descendants are going to be caught up in many transgressions. Life's not going to be easy. They're going to suffer much hardship. And in the end, how are they going to be redeemed? With the very horn of this ayal. It comes full circle. So it's the past, the present, and the future. The Shofros that we're reading is all about Matan Torah and also a final redemption of the Jewish people. What gives us the strength? How do we know that we're going to one day get to that redemption? It's being able to build up our own faith, blind faith, if you will, not blind, the faith of Abraham, which carried over to the Jewish people at Har Sinai, which carries on all the way to us, and that's how we're going to be able to merit, and that's the bracha that we're making in Shofros itself. And so the shofar is this, in the symbolism, I think, is connecting all of our past merits to our present tshuva, that work that we're doing, to ultimately go and bring about a final redemption. Like that's the sequencing of events. And so we are davening that we want to be awakened to be able to do that. And I think that is this notion. There's a beautiful idea by the Rav. The Rav suggests that the shofar itself is like a tefillah. The Rav says that it is the way that we pray. And so we literally, if you follow according to that minhag I just shared, where we intersperse the blowing the shofar throughout the silent Amidah, throughout the repetition of the Amidah, at the end of the Musaf Amidah, before the Musaf Amidah, it is serving as the tool and the catalyst for us to do all these things that we want to do, which is ultimately, we want to bring a final redemption, and we have to do it by actualizing our own actions and by recognizing God as the only king and actively coronating him in our lives. So that is Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. I want to just talk about one more thing here as it pertains to Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, which is why 10 psukim? Like if you go back to, again, the Gemara, Rosh Hashanah, I think it's like box 1. Let's find it here. Yeah, box 31. See, we're at the end here. Okay, box 31. So the mission tells us, in pochatin masar malchios, masar zichronos, masar shofros. You have to have 10 in malchios, zichronos, and shofros. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, im amar shalosh mikulan yatsa. If you say 3 from each, and you fulfill your obligation. So hani asar malchios keneged. Why do we say 10? Like, what is the significance? The Gemara wants to know the same question we want to know. Who came up with this idea of 10, right? Who came with it? So, Amar Rabbi Keneged Asara Hilulim Shamar David B'Sefer Tehillim. It's about the 10 praises that David said in Sefer Tehillim. What is he referring to? What are the Asara Hilulim? What is that referring to? So, last 10 chapters of Tehillim, which, by the way, we recite every single day as part of Sukkot Zimra, are all these praises of Hashem, Hallelujahs, right? That's what this is. That's how Sefer Tehillim ends. So, Hilulim Tuva Habu, Hanach Tichtivu Halu B'Teka Shofar, which, by the way, if you go to Shofros, we literally say the same Hallelujah. It's right here. So one possibility is, why do we blow Shofar? Why do we have 10 psukim? We say 10 psukim because perhaps it ties us to the notion of the 10 Hallels that David praises, that David HaMelech makes when he writes Tehillim. And it makes sense. If the Anshe Knesset Agdola, if you were trying to write like a pretty important prayer, so it makes sense that like the person who wrote like the most beautiful poetry and the most beautiful prayers, meaning in Tehillim, it makes sense to have like a callback, right, to said author by saying, okay, he had 10 and we're going to also have 10 psukim. That's one possibility, right? And maybe that's where the Anshe Knesset Agdola draw from. Rav Yosef Amar Kneged Aser Hadibrot. Why are there 10 psukim? Because it has to do with the Aser Hadibrot itself. Or maybe it's not the Aser Hadibros. Maybe it's about the 10 mamros, which is like the way that God created the world. We say Hayom Harad Olam. God created the world with 10 mamros. Same idea. Also, like that the Aser Hadibros. Just as a side note, where do we usually like blow the shofar from? So we blow the shofar from the bima. And usually, not always, but there's like a certain image that gets created. That the bima is often like raised, or it's the center point of the room, right? And so it's like we're almost like creating like this like Sinai moment, if you will, right? Everyone's looking up towards the bima, up towards the mountain, right? We're looking at what's going on over there, and we're blowing the shofar in this way. Also, like there's this beautiful imagery I always find of like there's usually 3 men up there when we blow the shofar, right? There's the shofar blower, there's the guy who's calling out the shofar blast, and then there's the chazan himself. It doesn't always work out that way, right? But it's usually 3 people. I always think about the image of like Moshe and his like having like his trusted correct Aaron and Chor on either side holding up his arms in the middle of this like battle. Like I always think about that. So I think there's something about like recreating these moments by these 10 psukim. And again, why creation itself? Vayomer de Breshit Tisha Havu. So, but there's really 9. Breshit Nami Mamarhu. The word Breshit is also Mamar. Kidichti B'dvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu. So again, maybe 10. So we see here that it is tied up to the notion of revelation. It's tied up to the notion maybe of creation. And so, what is it? And like it doesn't. The Gemara doesn't give us a final answer as to why there are 10 psukim. So I want to share just a few thoughts. One thought here I'll just point out is that I heard this from a friend of mine. It doesn't resonate with me, but maybe it will with you, which is that when we think about the number 10 in a sense is like a unity. So if like 1 is the single, 2 is like a duality. So then like the next unit would be 10. And what's the next unit after that? 100, right? How many shofar blasts do we blow? 100 shofar blasts. Right, so there's like these. There's like so 10 is like a very basic unit. As we see these 10s or all these 10s.
10 to the 1 and 10 to the 2.
So it could be that like that 10 is this like significant number as you're seeing. The Gemara is giving all these types of answers. I want to share another possibility from Rav Soloveitchik, which is that this is just another example that shows us just how intertwined Tefillah and Talmud Torah really are. If you think about it, so on Shabbos, what do we do on Shabbos? So we daven, but then we also have Kriyas Torah, right? We read the Torah. We read the Torah, which is Talmud Torah. Like we might think of it as laning, we might think of it as someone singing or performing. It's studying of Torah. You're supposed to follow the words. You're supposed to be saying them with the Baal Koreh. You're supposed to be doing Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum. You're supposed to be studying those words, understanding it. And so there's this link between davening and learning. And so the Musaf Shemona Esrei, so much so than anything else, is filled with these psukim because it's trying to emphasize for us just how intertwined davening and learning is. They are like connected like this. And by the way, what psukim do we need? We need to make sure that we have psukim from all of Tanakh. There's Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim in every one of these sections. So it's as if to say that the corpus of Tanakh plus our davening are intertwined. One is related to the other and needs the other to exist. And this is, the Rav expands on this elsewhere. So just an interesting thought as to why there is 10. One last idea for the Musaf Amidah, which I'll just share, really comes from the end of the Chazara itself. Just like kind of an interesting thought on page 637. This is, we have all these hayoms, hayom, and like every community has their own melodies. In Memphis, we had like a kids choir, and they would sing it. It took forever. It was so cute, but it took forever. And it's Hayom Ta'amtzenu. Today, may you strengthen us. Hayom Tvarachenu. Today, you should bless us. And so Sfas Emes has this like really like the most amazing idea. The Sfas Emes says that Hayom, it doesn't mean that like, today God do this for us. That's not what it means. Sfas Emes says Hayom. Let this day, let the day itself, what we're doing here, let that serve as a blessing for us. Let this day strengthen us for the rest of the year, right? This day should give us strength. This day should give us brachos. Like when we talk about Avram being a source of strength for us, and we talked about, or in Malchios, Richness, and Shofros, that Zechus Avos, if we're successful at the end of the Musaf Amidah, when we're saying all these hayoms, it's not that today God bless us. Let the action of what we did today, as we got closer to God, we coronated God, we accepted upon ourselves in our heart to take actions We modeled the Avos. We modeled Chana. We followed all these opinions and we coronated God. Let those actions be what gives us all these wonderful things, these brachot, this greatness, and that God should also ultimately deal kindly with us. And the second to last one, Tikabel barachamim uvratzon tefilotenu, that God, through our actions today, that God should compassionately accept our prayers, and not just our prayers, but the prayers of our entire congregation.
It's a little bit like the idea of Yom Kippur, that Itzumo shelo machaber. What is Itzumo? This is exactly.
That's the Sfas Emes, correct. Yeah, it's a beautiful idea. Correct. Correct. So we're basically out of time. So I'll just share one thought outside. I wanted to get to some of the slichos that we're going to say in Yom Kippur, and other things like that. What I will just say is tangentially related to this, which is we talked about in Zichronos, activating in our hearts the memories internally. When we go through the Yud Gimel Midos Rachamim, and there's many examples of this, as you go through those Yud Gimel Midos Rachamim, the Rambam talks about this. There's an incredible tshuva and others as well. Rav Asher Weiss has this beautiful idea as well, that when we're saying the Hashem Hashems, we're not saying, God, you are a God of compassion. We're not saying, God, you are a God of mercy. I mean, we are saying those words, but what we're really trying to say, and even Ezra himself has an amazing shot on this, I would encourage you to look it up. It's in Shmos, I can give you the source, is that we are internalizing. We are committing ourselves to be in this way. If we are kind, then God will deal kindly with us. If we are compassionate, then God will be compassionate with us. If we are slow to anger, then God will be slow to anger with us. The only way we can ask God to remember, no different than Zichronos, He knows everything, He knows all these things, is if we're willing to take the actions ourselves as well. And so as we get to Yom Kippur, as we get to the Tefillot of Rosh Hashanah, let's not just think that we have to say the words and it's going to automatically punch our ticket straight on to God. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot of hard work ahead of us, very meaningful and hopefully spiritually fulfilling work, but hard work. And I pray that all of us should have an easy go of it, and that all of our tefillot should be answered for a happy and healthy New Year, for all of us, for our community, for all Klal Yisrael. That should be a k'tiva v'chatima tova, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon in person here at TRM, and wherever you are, just enjoy Chag and stay safe. Okay, we'll stop right here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Just a little historical moment.